guys. Welcome back to the podcast, the Bibliotherapy for Black Women podcast. I'm your host, Amaka. It is a Sunday when I am recording. We are almost halfway through December at this point, and it's morning. I'm in my usual setup at my desk looking at my window. Just woke up maybe like 15 minutes ago. So I just put on my sweatshirt and sat at my desk, and I was like, okay, we're ready. Let's do this. So how did my week go? My week was actually pretty chill. Had some rescheduling in terms of work, so I had more personal time. I did a little bit more reading. Gotta be honest, I've been slacking on my reading a little bit. So we're getting back on that horse. And, you know, the days are getting shorter. I am struggling a little bit with that because it's dark at 4:30. And I just am working on recalibrating my body with that because it can really affect you mentally. Like, if there are folks out there that are struggling with daylight savings, like, I am right there with you. I don't even personally get why we do it, but I digress. So outside of last week being, you know, kind of calm and quiet, I realized I was finding myself in more moments than usual where I had to offer myself some more self-compassion. And when I say that, I mean that, you know, my apartment was not in the best shape, you know, and it was a little bit harder for me to keep up with chores and things like that. And in my mind, this was like the week prior. And I was like, you know, what's going on? What's going on with me? I was really trying to turn inward and see if I can figure this out. Like, I would feel a little less motivated, you know. I didn't really want to cook as much, and I was just feeling a little less motivated overall. And, you know, I've really worked up until this point to not beat myself up if I don't meet my expectations. Like, I was really sitting and I was like, you know, what's going on? And I feel like the whole change with the seasons, the day getting shorter, you know, it getting a little bit colder, and, you know, the transition from fall to winter. Fall is my favorite season. I think I've said that on the podcast. It's not fun for me. And I think maybe my body was going through the transition, but I wasn't completely aware. So, you know, like I said, in the past, kind of falling off a little bit, I would really get on myself and, you know, get down on myself and be hard on myself. Like, what is wrong with you? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? But now, like I said, thankfully I have worked on my level of self-awareness, and I am more so like, hey girl, what's going on here? You know, this isn't what we usually do. This isn't the level that we usually operate, because, you know, there's something going on. Like, let's sit down and think about it. And I didn't really take into consideration up until that point that perhaps just the transition of the seasons was affecting me. So I was like, okay, you know, you have to give yourself grace. So I just resolved to do a little bit better. I'm one of those folks who, like, when I'm cooking lunch, I will use everything, and then the sink will be, populated with serving spoons and plates and things that I use to cook. So that was last week. And then I would not wash the things after or whatever. And I didn't like that. So this week I was a little bit better about, as I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, And I found that once I was done with making my meal, the sink was empty because I was, washing things and putting them away as my food was cooking, and it felt really good. So that's just like one thing. That was one thing that I was struggling with last week. And I felt, I don't know, the upkeep of my apartment was weighing on me a little bit. Like, it wasn't in complete disarray, but in terms of my general level of upkeep, I wasn't meeting it. So, yeah, I feel like I'm definitely turning a corner. This week was a little bit better. I was reading a little bit more, keeping up with, my apartment did not feel so hard. So, ebbs and flows. Ebbs and flows. You just have to kind of ride the wave and not beat yourself up while you're going through things. Sit down and kind of think, why is this happening? Because on a typical day, you're fine. So if it's not going that way, there's very likely a reason why. And I've gotten to the point where I don't beat myself up. I kind of just turn inward and ask myself what's going on. And I sit and think for a little while. So, if anyone out there is struggling, if they find that they haven't been able to kind of keep up with their daily life as well as they usually do, consider maybe it's the change of seasons. Maybe it's having less sunlight. Maybe it's the days getting colder. It can be tough around this time of the year. Maybe it's the holidays coming. You don't know. So I'm encouraging folks to, instead of beating yourself up and, being hard on yourself, turn inward. Just sit down and ask yourself what could be going on. And you might find that the answer comes to you, and it becomes a little bit easier for you to extend yourself some compassion. So, in so few words, that's kind of like a glimpse into my past week. Like, I hadn't worked out for 2 weeks, and I got back on that horse this week, so I'm really excited. And you know what got me there? My back started hurting. Oh my God, back pain is the worst. It is the worst. Like, my first real workout was a couple days before Thanksgiving. And at the time that I'm recording, it's been almost 3 weeks since then. So, like, it was just one of the things I was struggling with. And then, like, I was tidying up my room, and then I lifted myself up, and I was like, oh no, I need to start working out again. Because prior to Thanksgiving, I had started strength training, and I really love it. And I saw the difference almost right away. Because along with strength training, like, I'll do like about a half hour, and then I'll do like 10-15 minutes of yoga. So like, I'll do the lifting and then I'll do the stretching. And I was feeling really good. I generally feel my best when I'm consistently working out. So we're working on the consistency on that front. But I think my body is beating me to it because, when I was a little younger, I could go like a couple months, 2-3 months, at the, the part where I wasn't working out, I can go like 2-3 months. And I would feel okay. But now, nope. at 32 years old, which is kind of shocking. I'm like, 32, I don't even feel like is that young. I mean, that old. But 2 weeks out of not working out, my back was like, you need to get back to it. And I was like, okay. Because when my back is hurting, I literally can't do anything. It's tough. So I did some stretches that day to try and loosen it. You know, I showered and let the hot water run on my back so that it can help with the muscles. And then the next day, I hit the workouts again. And the back pain has stayed at bay. So we're going to keep it that way. Because I think my body's telling me at this point, you can't just be, you know, living life thinking you can't work out. It just don't work like that no more. So sometimes you have to learn lessons more than once. Sometimes it takes you 2, 3, 4, 5 times, just being real. So yeah, wish me luck with that, because I got to keep, my body does not let me just stay idle anymore, which is good. You know, it forces me to keep moving. I can't be sedentary for a longer period of time the way I used to, the way I could be when I was younger. I would go like long stretches, 6 months working out and then stop for like 2, 3 months. But I can't do that anymore. So here's to being more fit and working out on a more consistent basis. So enough about me. Let's get into the book. So I presume you've seen the title of this episode. I'm talking about what I've read this year. Altogether, I've read 6 books, and each book has given me something different. I have them in a pile next to me right here. And as I'm looking at them, like I'm remembering what time of year it was, you know, what was happening in my life, and I'm recalling the lessons that I got from them, and, you know, if I just enjoyed them, and the emotions I felt while reading them, because I believe like songs and like foods and things like that, books can represent a time in your life. So I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of go through these one by one and kind of spark some memories and flip through and dive in. So yeah, so I'm starting with Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. Full transparency, I started this in 2020, like late 2020, but I finished it in 2021, so I'm counting it. I finished it in February 2021. It's a dense book. It is over 700 pages. So that might give a little bit more context as to why, you know, I finished it in this year, but started it last year. I'm not one to read memoirs of presidents. Like, the idea of that sounds boring, gonna be honest. But, you know, there was an appeal of him being the first Black president. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten more interested in the nuances of politics, you know, how it works. And I was really interested to see how politics was working while he was president. So I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it, you know. It took me a couple months to get through because I was in school and I was reading it while I was in school. But and you know, it's his memoir, so everything is from his perspective. But I feel like he did a good job letting the reader in to what it's like to be president and what it's like to be a Black president. When he was president, when he first was elected in 2008, you know, I remember where I was. I was a sophomore in college at the time. I was commuting from home to school. So I remember that day. I had gotten home right before they announced that he was projected to win. So, like, you know, I was keeping up with updates on my phone while I was riding the train home. And then I got home, I rushed in. There were a couple of my family members in the den where the TV was. And we were just waiting and waiting. I believe I was standing up. And then not so long after, Wolf Blitzer, because, you know, he's the guy. Wolf Blitzer projected that he would win. And then me and whoever that were in the den just jumped up and down. Like, we were ecstatic. Like, we couldn't believe it. I was one of the folks who thought that I wouldn't see a Black president in my lifetime. Like, it was so surreal. It was so surreal. I remember going to sleep and waking up and remembering, and still I couldn't believe it. And it was a really happy time for me, and I think for a lot of people. But, you know, the honeymoon phase ends, and you remember that the person is human. And he talks about that in the book. He talks about how he can see how so many people were putting their hope in him because he was new, he was fresh, he didn't look like anybody else who had ran. He got farther than literally anyone else thought he could. And, you know, everyone was drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, so many people fell in love with him, and he was becoming aware of that, and he was kind of getting a little worried because he was, you know, he was more than aware that, you know, he was human. And he talked about how, like, you know, what's going to happen when people become disillusioned of him? What's going to happen when people realize that he's human? And, you know, he might not be any other president that we've seen, but he still has the limitations of any other president. Like, his responsibilities and his reach, his capabilities as the president don't change because he doesn't look like any of the past presidents. So he talked about his worries about that. You know, he talked about the economy and trying to bolster its recovery with, you know, everything that happened in 2008. He talks about his trips, his relationships with other countries. He gives an example about how he was on this, like, he was going to this conference. I don't know if it was a G8 summit. It's been a while. Like I said, I read this almost a year ago, so I'm just trying to recollect. He went to, I think it was a G8 summit. They were having talks, and he kind of had a feeling that there were some conversations going on around him that he wasn't privy to, and he figured out a way to kind of, quote unquote, expose the folks that were icing him out. And he almost tied their hands in terms of cooperating. I'm not doing a very good job right now describing what I'm talking about, but if you read the book, you know, because I remember reading it and I was like, oh, okay, that was clever, you know, in terms of negotiations and bringing things into fruition, things that you want. The last chapter is about the quest to capture Osama bin Laden, and that was by far my favorite chapter. I remember reading and I was like, oh, I'm gonna probably go to sleep, but I got to a point where I just couldn't. I read well until the wee hours of the morning just so I can finish it. It was a kind of like a movie-esque edge of your seat type of chapter. Very well written. The whole book is very well written. The whole book is very dense. So, you know, if you're reading it, don't beat yourself up if it takes you a while. I also liked the chapters where he talks about just life in the White House, like just those mundane things really intrigued me because, you know, you don't really get an inside look in this way often. So he talked about just like regular days in the White House, conversations with his advisors. He was very transparent about how their dynamics were. He shared what he thought about people, positive or negative. Very much, I would say, an honest take on his presidency and how he thought he did in terms of the job and how it affected his marriage and how Michelle was coping and, kind of I don't want to say toll, it wasn't negative, but like the change that happened, with his family and adjusting to life in the White House and being the first family. He did a really good job. Reading this book too also gave me insight as to why we ended up with Trump after him. I do remember him talking in the book about kind of having a hard time translating his thoughts to folks, that he was talking to sometimes, because his level of intelligence is, Harvard, Columbia. Did he go to Harvard? I don't remember. God. But, he's an Ivy League grad. How his brain processes things is very intricate, and his way of conveying them sometimes does not translate to the average American, and he had some struggle with that, And then Trump, among other things, was really able to talk to folks from an emotional place. A lot of people resonated with that and kind of latched onto that. And that was one of the problems. It was not the main one, but it was just one of those things, along with, people didn't really think he could do it. And then he kind of swooped in from the back and blindsided everybody. But in terms of the role that perhaps President Obama played, Trump was kind of able to push on people's buttons emotionally. He got to people emotionally, maybe folks that were dissatisfied with the work that President Obama, as the current president, was doing, folks that were dissatisfied with the way that they thought the country was going. Trump really played to those weak spots, and it brought him to the White House, amongst other things, like I said. But just going based off of his book, that was one of the things that I think contributed to it. So, I say all this to say it's a great memoir, in my opinion. Like, I feel like he took his time and really wanted to let the reader in as much as he could into what his life at the White House was like, what life at the White House is like, apart from him, because it runs, it's its own machine, and, he's leading it. But it was really interesting. If you're one for memoirs, this is great. If you're one for political books, this is great. I would definitely recommend it. Yeah, The Promised Land. So I'm trying not to have these quick discussions about each book be too long, because I don't want the podcast to be too long. I'm going to try and keep it between 5 and 10 minutes. So the next book that I read was Professional Troublemaker by Luvvie Ajayi Jones. Luvvie's book was the first one that I talked about on this podcast. I believe I was reading it around the time where I decided I was going to start one, or the idea was kind of rumbling. So I talk about in that episode how I'm Judging You, in my opinion, was just okay. I had, expectations for it, and it didn't really quite meet them, gonna be honest, but I think that I got more of what I wanted from Professional Troublemaker. Like what I thought I would get from I'm Judging You, I got from her second book. And I think that just speaks to, where she was in life. Nothing against her as an author, for sure. I just resonated with this one a little bit more. I resonated with her kind of looking back at her time in college. And, sometimes when you're younger, you want to beat yourself up for the decisions that you made, but she talks about kind of thanking yourself for the decisions that you made when you were younger, some of them, because if you find yourself in a space where you are doing much better and things are going well, you know, that's the result of seeds that were planted, you know, decisions that you made when you were younger. I really resonated with that. She just appears to have grown and has taken lessons from points where, you know, she was struggling and interactions with the public that weren't so positive. She's taken lessons from that. You can just tell. She talks about knowing your worth, having good people around you that support you, not being afraid to respectfully institute, you know, boundaries in different areas of your life where you need them. You know, themes like this that are really, that can be helpful, you know, if you're in your 20s and 30s. I connected with her writings more in this book. And, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what she comes out with next. And I'm looking forward to reading from where she is now and in the future. Because I can see the progression. I connected much more with this read than when her first one. And, you know, like, that's progress. Everyone is in different areas of their life when they, you know, do these things, write books. Even me, you know, I'm sure I won't be where I am now in a year. Hopefully mentally, I'm, you know, hoping that I am in a better place. So, yeah. This wasn't my favorite book for the year, but it was a good one. So next is my favorite book of the year. The next book I read was What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing by Dr. Bruce D. Perry and Oprah Winfrey. This book changed my life. That sounds really dramatic. You know, it wasn't like I was a completely different person after I read it. It changed my life in the way that it changed the way I think about how people relate to me. And I kind of understood this before reading the book, but the way that they talk about people's trauma and cultivating their worldview and how a lot of that informs how people interact with the world. So their interactions with you, what they do to you, is not necessarily personal. So it doesn't help to take things personal. That was life-changing. That was. And I'm going to talk about one of the books that I've also read this year, The Four Agreements. It has a chapter talking about don't take things personally, but it doesn't really go into, it goes into it a little bit, why you shouldn't, but this book really dives deep. And it explains what happens to you when you sustain trauma. You know, we think about it kind of elusively, but it's a physical thing that happens to the body and the mind. And it can really affect how you engage with your world. And it can affect how you build your world, you know, how you see your world. Anything outside of that, your interactions are affected by that. And just this whole concept of from being a baby, how you see the world is shaped by the people around you, the places that you go, the things that you do, the images that you see, the sounds that you hear, the food that you taste, like everything. A lot of that happens in like the most formidable years, which, you know, is when you're younger, and it sets in. And it's pretty strong and it locks in to your psyche and it's kind of hard to change. And, you know, when you're when you go through something and you sustain trauma, there is a tangible effect to your worldview. So, if I'm interacting with people, what they do has nothing to do with me, really. It may feel like it does, but it doesn't. They're just moving about in the world how they know to. I might be someone who reminds them of something and then they don't take a liking to me. That's not about me. It might feel like it is, but it's not. I might remind them of something or someone that brings a warm memory to them, and then they engage with me. Though that feels positive, it doesn't have anything to do with me. So that realization was big. It was big. So from the time that I finished this book, and I think I was kind of getting there too on my own, like just realizing, life, a lot of things that people do aren't about you, but this really, really solidified it. Like, if just going about my day, if anything happens and I'm like, what was that? I don't even think about it too hard. Whereas before I would be like ruminating and replaying the scene over and over and wondering, what did I do? Is this my fault? But now, like, I'm just like, okay. Especially with folks who perhaps you're interacting with them for the first time and you don't really get the engagement or response that you think that, would make sense. It's not about you. Whatever is going on with that person is not about you. It's not about you. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend reading this book or listening to it on Audible, however you can consume this read, because I really, 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 it really helped solidify some ideas for me. And, just from learning, from a learning perspective, it's great. It helps you kind of consider the trauma that maybe someone has gone through and how that could explain why they're doing what they're doing or behaving how they're behaving. It touches on kids and trauma. It's just good. It's a good book. This is my favorite, and I would recommend anybody read it. Again, it's called What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing by Bruce D. Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It flows like a conversation, like it has Dr. Perry, and he'll say what he has to say, and then Oprah, and she'll say what she has to say. So it's pretty much a conversation over the span of almost 300 pages, but it's not dense. Like, it flows, and you don't really feel too heavy. The topics can be heavy. So like if you start it and you need a little break, don't feel bad. There are heavy topics in here, but in terms of reading it, the flow of reading, I think it's pretty digestible. So yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend. This was my favorite of 2021. Next, we have You Are Your Best Thing, Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience, which was edited by Tarana, Burke, and Brené Brown. This was an anthology. Oh my God, say that 3 times fast. Which is a collection of essays by different authors. We have one by Luvvie, we have one by Tarana Burke, we have one by Laverne Cox, we have one by Mark Lamont Hill, we have one by Austin Channing Brown, among other people. I really loved this book. People gave their perspectives about vulnerability from the Black perspective, the luxury of even feeling it sometimes. We don't get that. That's just my personal opinion. it can be a luxury to feel vulnerability publicly as a Black person. But what I loved about this book is that people are really doing the work to heal. And you can see it in the essays. You can read it in the essays. They can be gut-wrenching. They can be really sad. But they are hopeful. That's a theme that I got from this book. It's hopeful. People are really opening themselves up and sharing what they've struggled with and what they didn't feel safe doing when they were younger, which has a lot to do with how they were raised, which has a lot to do with how their caregivers were raised. And like I said, a theme I saw in here was hope and knowing better, so wanting to do better and being the pivot point for the next generation and giving them space to be vulnerable and to share their feelings and to not feel like they have to bottle them up. And I think that that is so important. My favorite essay in this book, which I talked about in that podcast episode, was Running Out of Gas by Sonia Renee Taylor. I think that for me personally, that was the most raw essay. And I remember reading it and closing the book and having to take a break. It was so good. The whole book was good, but that was my favorite. So, and like I said, Tarana Burke has an essay in it. She was also an editor. She did this with Brené Brown because Brené Brown has devoted her life to studying vulnerability, but they decided together to put a collection of works that focus specifically on the Black experience. And I think this was needed, because vulnerability from the perspective of a white person or a non-Black person is different, in my opinion. I'm saying in my opinion because I know, obviously everyone can't agree, but I feel so strongly like vulnerability, feeling shame, what you're able to do with that, how you're able to express it is not the same across the board. And I feel like society gives a little bit more room to white people and folks that aren't Black. They give a little bit more room to folks to be able to feel that a little bit more openly, feel the whole range of emotions, sadness, anger, shame. They give a little bit more space to that, and they give less space to Black folks. And if we're even able to show that, it has to be in a more private space. It has to be in a space where we know that we're safe. It's not very often that we're able to do it communally, like with other people. So I think if you want to read something that makes you feel a little less alone about how you're feeling, if you want to read about folks that have gone through a lot of, the same emotions that we go through as Black people, but are figuring out ways to address that vulnerability in a healthy way, I think this is a good read. It can be tough at times, but I think it plays a very important role in this whole general conversation, about Blackness and vulnerability and dealing with shame and coming out of it on the other side, coming out of it in a way that is healthy and in a way that will benefit, future generations. So really, really, really enjoyed this book. The next book of the year was Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by psychotherapist Nedra Tawwab. I recently published a 3-part series about this book. Still didn't even scratch the surface of everything that she discussed. I think this is a very good type of improve your daily life book, because there's always somewhere in our lives that we can improve. I believe, we're not perfect, so I'm sure that folks out there can think of an area of their life where maybe they might benefit from a little bit more boundary setting and might need some help in not being so much of a people pleaser, or need help with not pouring from an empty cup and, stretching yourself a million ways with the demands in your life, and being able to kind of take stock and take inventory of what you're potentially able to deprioritize, so that you're able to give yourself more of yourself, and put boundaries where you can. Just like I was able to kind of shift my mindset a little bit with what happened to you, I was able to take just some everyday lessons from this book. It has boundaries when it comes to different areas of life. Boundaries with family, boundaries with friends, boundaries with work, boundaries with social media. So it touches on big aspects of your daily life. And I don't necessarily think that the approach to setting boundaries is universal, but I think that this is a great starting point. And I think that this is just like a good book to have to refer back to, because, with life, life, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, it ebbs and flows. So you might be in a place in your life where you're being really good about keeping boundaries and keeping your cup full and not feeling drained. And then you might have another part of your life where you have to refer back to this book because you're struggling a little bit. It helps with if you are starting from zero and you don't even know what to do. It gives you some guidance on how to start. It gives you exercise prompts so that you're able to apply the information that's in the book and see where you can improve specific areas of your life. It has a quiz at the end where you can get a better idea of if you have rigid boundaries or porous boundaries or healthy boundaries. So I really got a lot from this book. It helped me to take a look at, my life in general and see where I'm good with boundaries and see where I need to tighten up a little bit, and that changes over time too. Your relationships with boundaries in this moment may not be your relationship with boundaries next year or 5 years or 10 years from now. But I think what is good with this book is you're able to come back and you're able to adjust and see where things need to change. So very, very much so recommend it. So the last book that I read this year is a reread. And if you know me, I don't reread books. I'm not one to reread books. I get them, I start them, I finish them, I get what I want from them, and that's it. But this is one of those books where I feel like you should read them like every 5 years. It's The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I read this book almost 10 years ago when I was living in Delaware. Not even a year out of school, got my first real job, living on my own, first apartment. I read this book when a lot of firsts were happening for me in adulthood. And I'm reading it now and I'm going to try not to get emotional because, you very rarely are able to tangibly measure progress. Like you can, but like in terms of holding a book and remembering when you read it the first time and reading the notes that I wrote when I was 22 and reading them now that I'm 32, I'm seeing that a lot of my weak spots in my early 20s, I have figured out. I have improved in my early 30s. And that's just a testament to progress. That's just a testament to an increase in self-awareness. That is a testament to lessons. That is a testament to not being knocked down by life and experiences and just always getting up. And I'm really proud of myself. I'm so proud of myself because I'm reading these chapters. I'm reliving a little bit. I'm remembering my way of thinking when I first read this book, and I'm comparing it to my way of thinking now. And I am not the same person. And I'm not the same person in a good way, Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. I feel like when I first read this book, these were new concepts to me, which, is okay. Early 20s, you're young. You're coming out, typically everyone's journey is different. But for me, I embarked on similar journeys of other people going through high school, going through college, graduating, getting a job. The 20s, your early 20s are a really, really delicate time, in my opinion. And you are on the journey of finding yourself and getting to know yourself and realizing who you are. And that journey continues up until you die. But I think that the 20s are like a pivotal time in that journey. And, reading this book at that time was really enlightening. I'm looking at the lines that I highlighted that resonated with me then and reading it now. Some of the things that I highlighted then, I highlighted now too. But there's so much more that I think just with life and the years that have come and gone that I connected with more. I'm reading my thoughts that I wrote in the margins of this book 10 years ago. And I'm seeing that some of them are no longer issues for me. And I've been able to figure them out, which could move me to tears because it's just like I'm holding in my hand a measure of progress that I've made, from when I was straight out of college to, my early 30s now. So I think this book, it's a good way of measuring where you are mentally at that point. I would say read it if you can every few years, just as a reminder, because the information in it is timeless. And I think that it's always something beneficial to go back to. The reminders will always be helpful to everyday life. And yeah, like I really try hard to speak up more now. Like I really try hard to ask questions now. I really try hard not to fill the gaps in my mind of things that I'm not clear with stories and, kind of take them as truth and run with them. Like not making assumptions. I really try hard to do my best every day, knowing that my best is going to change from minute to minute, and be okay with that, and be compassionate to myself about that. Like, I am a lot better now with not taking things personally. With books like What Happened to You, it gets easier. You realize that a lot of what goes on around you has nothing to do with you. People are living their lives and they're interacting with you how they know to interact with the world. Sometimes that changes, but at the end of the day, you are not the problem. You're not the reason why people are doing what they're doing. And when you're able to really digest that and understand that, it's freeing. So, yeah, I think in terms of staples, if you were to build a life library, I would say so far, my staples would be the 4 Agreements, What Happened to You, and Set Boundaries, Find Peace. So I think I'll have this be like a running theme throughout the podcast. We're going to start building our life libraries of books that have improved our life from like a bird's eye view, and then books that have improved our lives, day to day, and everything in between. Books that we just enjoyed. Maybe we didn't really take huge life lessons from it, but they represent a really good time in our life and we just enjoyed the story. I'm hoping to talk about some fiction in 2022. I know the big focus for this podcast is books that deal with improving our everyday life, but I love fiction and I just want to switch it up every so often. So I'm going to talk about fiction. Fiction can very much still offer you points of reflection that make you think about yourself. So I want to incorporate that more into the podcast. So yes, we are going to start building our life libraries. And if you have a recommendation, reach out to me and let me know. And I will look into it. Perhaps I've already read it, or I can put it on my reading list. And I would love to learn more and share my thoughts about those books. So, yeah, I guess I'm segueing out of talking about specific books because this is the final book. 6 books over the course of the year. I did majority of this reading the second half of the year when I started mulling over this idea of starting this podcast. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, because sometimes it can be hard to get myself to start reading. But knowing that I have a podcast where I talk about books, it gets me going. So I did most of my reading the second half of the year, and my goal for 2022 is to just double the amount of books. So I read 6 this year. I'm going for 12 next year, which is a book a month, and that's minimum. I think best case scenario, I read 16 to 20. I'm really going to shoot for at least 16, but minimum going to read 12. And yeah, I'm really excited for books in 2022. I already have a few on deck that I'm going to get started with reading. I have put together a loose schedule of episodes for the next 4-ish months. So I'm really excited to get to reading and recording and continuing on this journey with you guys. This is episode 10 that I'm recording, and I'm celebrating this milestone because I remember just thinking, about starting a podcast. I remember just thinking about it. I sat on the idea for a little while, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a microphone. I did that. The microphone was in its box for like 3 weeks, maybe a month. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do some YouTube research. I watched some videos on good programs for recording. I watched a couple YouTube videos about how to edit a podcast. And I recorded my trailer, put that up. I recorded my journey episode to becoming an NP, put that up. And like, I was really kind of just taking it as it comes. Like, I was trying not to get ahead of myself. And if you know me, you know I like to plan. If I could, I'm laughing because I really crack myself up sometimes. Because if I could plan this whole podcast from like the first episode to the last one I will ever record, I would. It's just me. So like, embarking on this journey has given me lessons in itself. Like, girl, like, you just one podcast at a time, one podcast at a time, one book at a time, one chapter at a time. Just get through this chapter, just get through this page, you know. Like, doing this podcast has been a tangible example of take it as it comes. Just like, you cannot possibly think that you can plan everything with this podcast. You legitimately just have to go one book at a time. Okay, let's read this book. Okay, let's record this episode. Okay, let's edit. Like, it's a process. It's a process. And I'm grateful for it. It's frustrating at times, but it's a reminder to me that progress is not linear. You see more progress over longer spans of time, but in the day-to-day, it doesn't feel like it. And I talked about this, I think, in like one of my earlier episodes. It's less helpful for me to measure progress day to day because you'll feel like you're not getting anything done. And it's a place where if you're not careful, you can really get down on yourself. So I started measuring progress from week to week. Like, I don't measure progress anymore day to day. I'm like, okay, what happened this week? What progress did I make this week? What progress did I make this month? And that gives me, I think, a more realistic view of progress and improvement and movement, seeing movement over a period of time. So yeah, I say all this to say thank you guys so much. I'm ending the episode here. Thank you. I'm going to find a way to celebrate today, getting to episode 10. Here is to many, many, many more episodes of this podcast. Here is to more people finding it and more people resonating with it and more people, you know, connecting with it and finding new books to read and gaining life lessons from books and developing love for books. Like, I've been passionate about reading since I was in 2nd grade, you know, and I've had times in my life where I'm not reading as much, but, you know, I have returned to my love that is books and reading, and I intend to stay there, and I intend to continue sharing my love with the people that will listen. So if you enjoyed this episode, please share with anyone who you think will enjoy. Please recommend. If you listen to the end, I thank you so much. If you have listened to any other episode up until this point, thank you so much. Please follow, please subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you feel moved by the content that I'm sharing in a positive way, please share a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to reach out to me, please do. Feel free to email me at btbwpodcast@gmail.com. Again, btbwpodcast@gmail.com. And here is to many, 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 many more books and more conversations and more life and more enjoyment and more love in 2022. All right, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Be well. Bye.